Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WARC Podcast. I'm Adi Kishore, Insight Director at WARC. These are challenging times to be a marketer. Both the consumer landscape and the media environment are changing at pace. But clear insights are even more important now to navigate this new reality, which is why we're here today, to introduce you to WARC's new 2026 Consumer Trends Report. This looks at the forces reshaping consumer purchasing decisions over the coming year. It's a result of our ongoing partnership with GWI, where we combine their extensive global consumer data with WARC's brand research, frameworks, and case study analysis. And I'm delighted to be joined by two guests who've been instrumental in bringing these insights together. But before we speak to them, let's hear from today's sponsor.
There's no shortage of opinions in marketing right now, but the brands winning in today's market aren't adding to the noise, they're helping marketers navigate through it. Lions Advisory partners with the world's leading brands, agencies, and media platforms to transform their point of view into game-changing thought leadership. That means evidence-based research, frameworks, and expert commentary, all built on decades of expertise from WARC, Cannes Lions, Effie, and Contagious. In today's market, it's not enough to just have an opinion. You need to be a credible authority. Take the next step at lions.co/thought leadership.
Now, we're joined today by two brilliant guests. Jason Mander, Chief Insights Officer at GWI, whose team's data forms the backbone of our findings, and Stephanie Sue, Senior Research Analyst here at WARC, who led the research and analysis for this report. Jason, Stephanie, thanks so much for joining us here today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to discussing the trends.
Thanks, Adi. Good to be here.
So, as we move into 2026, consumer sentiment remains pretty fragmented and uncertain. We're seeing a fairly consistent theme across all markets, really. Persistent, elevated uncertainty, largely driven by geopolitical conflict, but trade fragmentation as well, and high debt levels. Stephanie, in the report, you described this as a state of permacrisis. What does that mean for consumers and brands?
Right. So when we talk about permacrisis, we're referring to that prolonged uncertainty that we've all been experiencing in the past couple of years. And that's created a lot of fatigue for consumers, both emotionally and financially. And if you think about how this is impacting them, is changing how they're spending, what they value, and also where they're looking for comfort. In the report, we actually dive into 5 trends that are emerging out of this environment and what these trends mean for marketers.
Thanks, Stephanie. And Jason, from your point of view, looking at the vast database of GWI data, are you seeing this play out fairly consistently across markets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you might expect, the intensity does vary a little bit region by region, but the underlying patterns are remarkably consistent. Consumers across the world are making deliberate choices about where to find joy, how to connect, and what to trust.
And obviously, that's of huge significance to marketers. So let's take a look at the 5 trends that are outlined in this report that Stephanie mentioned, starting with what might be the most immediate challenge to brands. Trend number 1 is uncertainty fuels comfort consumption. Stephanie, you've been tracking how financial pressure is reshaping spending patterns. What's the core kind of takeaway on this one?
Yeah, so this goes back to that prolonged uncertainty that I was talking about earlier, and how that's created a sense of fatigue for consumers, both emotionally and financially. And that's really causing them to redirect their spending towards things that bring them joy and comfort. And we're seeing consumers being more intentional about turning to more smaller and accessible forms of joy that are in place of the bigger financial milestones like home ownership or retirement savings, which are increasingly falling further out of reach for many people.
So there's 2 aspects here. One is a sort of cutting back on high ticket investments, but then it's also about redirecting.
Yes, so there will definitely be some level of cutting back, but consumers are being also more intentional and redirecting, as you say, they're spending towards things that are actually bringing them joy. So they're prioritizing smaller indulgences that can provide them that emotional relief without necessarily breaking the bank.
Interesting. And Jason, are you seeing this like my earlier question, are you seeing this across demographics and markets in your data?
We are, and it's really quite pronounced. I mean, the data shows that consumers everywhere are actively seeking escapism and comfort, particularly in those categories that offer that immediate sense of gratification or emotional connection. And what's interesting to me is it's not just younger consumers or lower income segments, as you might perhaps expect. We're seeing this behavior across age groups and income levels. The difference, really, I guess, is what people in different segments define as accessible joy for them.
Can you give us a few examples of where the spending's going?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing increased interest in comfort food categories, for example. Also, entertainment subscriptions, those small, more obtainable luxury items. And then there's experiences that feel special but don't require major financial commitment. So think premium coffee, think streaming services, think those affordable beauty products or local dining experiences rather than expensive vacations.
So there's an opportunity then for brands that can deliver these sort of moments of pleasure and comfort without that don't require big financial investment.
You're exactly right. And I think it's the brands that understand this emotional dimension alongside the financial constraint that people are feeling that will be the ones that really show up well and drive the biggest connection with consumers.
Great, thanks, Jason. Stephanie, this search for comfort seems to also extend beyond physical products into the digital realm, according to this report. So that brings us to our second trend, which is about AI redefining companionship. This is perhaps one of the most unexpected findings in this report for me as I was reading it. Stephanie, you talk about how more users are turning to AI chatbots for companionship. Tell us what's happening here.
Yeah, I agree with you. First off, it's one of the more interesting trends to when I was writing as well. Overall, this trend is about the changing relationship that consumers have with AI. And we're seeing that instead of just using AI just for functional purposes like searching for information or to complete their tasks, increasingly they're using it for emotional connection as well. So they're looking for advice, friendship, and in some cases, romance. So the data shows us that globally, 1 in 10 consumers say they've been in a relationship with an AI chatbot. And when we try to understand what's happening here and what's driving this trend, we see that loneliness is a major factor, as you would expect. And AI is really filling that gap that traditional social connections between humans aren't meeting for many people.
Wow, I mean, I certainly found that pretty amazing. Jason, is this purely about loneliness, or are there other factors at play?
Yeah, it is a lot to get your head around. I think it's a combination of factors. Loneliness is a pretty important one among them, but there's more to it than that. We have to remember that AI chatbots are available 24/7. They don't judge you. They remember previous conversations and they can be customized to your individual preferences. In a way, they're like the ideal companion that can behave exactly as you want them to. But more practically speaking, for those people who might struggle with social anxiety, who work irregular hours, who feel maybe disconnected from their communities, just want to ask things that they are more comfortable asking in the context of an anonymous chatbot than a face-to-face conversation. AI offers a form of interaction that feels safe and accessible.
But there's sort of scary bits to this, right? I mean, you hear about AI hallucinations. I mean, how much can we trust AI companions?
You're totally right to flag that. I mean, AI adoption is still growing. We're still in the relatively early stages. So we should be thinking about these areas of concern, especially around mental health impacts, dependency, and the potential for vulnerable populations to be exploited. Consumers do see the potential benefits, but they also recognize the risks, and any brand would need to recognize them as well.
Yeah, I mean, from a brand perspective, this seems like a bit of a minefield. Stephanie, from a marketer standpoint, how should you be thinking about integrating these AI-driven interactions?
They should approach it very carefully. So, as Jason touched on, there are many concerns, and there's a huge point to be made about safety here. So, some of the key questions that brands can start to ask is about the customer journey. So, how can you safely integrate those AI driven interactions to help alleviate the sense of loneliness that people have? And also, how can you provide that companionship that people are looking for? And also, really importantly, you need to be thinking about the safeguards and the ethical guidelines that need to be in place to protect those vulnerable populations from mental health and safety risks, as we mentioned.
Can you give us an example of where this might work well versus where it could all go horribly wrong?
Sure. A positive example would be a fitness brand. So, if you think about a virtual coach, for example, that can provide you with personalized encouragement and support and motivation, that's quite a nice example that is relatively low risk, and it also adds a lot of value to your customers and your end users. But where it could get problematic is when you're talking about AI companions and positioning them as a replacement for human relationships, especially for vulnerable groups, if you think about elderly people or teenagers. So, with these kinds of groups, and just in general, brands need to be very clear about the boundaries and that they're willing to meet, and also ensure that they're not exploiting loneliness for commercial gain.
Understood. I mean, coming back to you again for a second, Jason, do you see this trend continuing to grow, or do you think that this is a sort of temporary phenomenon, just new, the sort of hype cycle of AI?
Yeah, I mean, the data would tell us that we're only just at the beginning. As adoption increases and the underlying technology gets better and more sophisticated, we'd expect more and more people to start engaging in this way. That, of course, means that the ethical questions will only become more important. So, for any brand thinking of playing in this space, it's all about establishing clear ethical frameworks right now as the space is evolving.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is AI companionship, could be a genuine opportunity for brands to provide value and connection, but it really does require quite careful consideration around ethics and safeguards. And the brands that get this wrong will face significant backlash.
That's right.
Okay, now let's stay with trust and protection, but move on to our third trend, which looks at growing concerns around young people's digital experiences. So this one is about emerging challenges to youth social media access. Stephanie, concerns around social media's impact on minors have escalated dramatically. What's happening here?
Right. So this one, we're seeing a wave of legislation and debate, particularly last year and this year as well, around social media bans for minors. And this is happening at a global level. And it's driven by concerns from governments and also parents about the potential harms of social media for teens and children. When we look at the data, around two-thirds of consumers think that social media is harmful for children. And some of the biggest concerns are around cyberbullying, exposure to harmful content, and also just general exposure to strangers online. And from the platform side, this has started to trigger some changes in how they operate. And for brands, this also has implications for how they're thinking about reaching younger audiences.
I think that's a really critical point from a marketing standpoint. What does this sort of mean in practical terms for brands that have traditionally reached out to younger audiences through social media?
Yeah, we're also already seeing some pivots among certain brands. They recognize that it's really important now, especially as you lose direct access to younger audiences through social media, the importance of building trust with the caregivers, the guardians, and the parents. And some of them are also doing this by emphasizing child safety and transparency in their marketing strategies.
Interesting. And what does that mean about influencer marketing? That is such a huge part of marketing now. It's been a massive channel for reaching younger audiences. Jason, are you seeing anything in your data?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship and the influence that influencers have on younger demographics really is pronounced. So they won't just disappear, but the whole relationship will need to be reconsidered with a stronger emphasis on safety controls. So if influencer partners are part of your playbook at the moment, it's going to become increasingly important to think about compliance, making sure you're meeting regulations through due diligence, audience verification, and just being transparent in how you're going about it.
And I mean, do you think these restrictions will work? Because we're dealing with, increasingly every young generation is more tech savvy than the last. So we're dealing with, you know, teenagers who are used to sort of finding workarounds in the digital sphere.
Yeah, it's such an important question to consider. I mean, we're already seeing some conversations shift to platforms that are not classified as social media. And of course, tech savvy children will find ways around technical restrictions. Nonetheless, the restrictions will have an impact. They will make it harder to just access casually. They will introduce friction to the process. And so, together with that, there will be a natural, strong conversation around digital safety. So, while the enforcement might not be perfect, I still expect there to be a cultural shift taking place.
Got it. So let's quickly summarize this for our listeners. The restrictions will threaten direct access to younger audiences, but there's an opportunity to build trust with parents, caregivers, guardians by demonstrating the brand's genuine sort of commitment to safety and transparency.
Good news! Decades of benchmarking, insights, and best-in-class case studies are now available at the push of a button. Lions Intelligence is the new operating system for creative marketing excellence. With state-of-the-art AI technology and established marketing insights from the WARC, Contagious IQ, and WARC, all in a single adaptive workspace that evolves with your thinking. Save hours of manual work and share your thinking with clarity and confidence. Lions Intelligence is where groundwork becomes great work. Insight, strategy, creativity, execution, all in one place. To learn more, check out intelligence.lions.co.
Right, let's shift gears to a very different kind of challenge, one that's starting to reshape global brand perceptions. Trend 4 is the reassessment of made in China. Stephanie, Chinese companies are moving beyond traditional manufacturing roles. What's changing in the industry?
Yeah, so this one is another interesting one. And as you say, there's definitely been an evolution for Chinese companies, which are now establishing themselves increasingly as influential global players. They're building these highly valued, emotionally resonant brands rather than being just low cost manufacturers for the rest of the world, which has historically been the association for many of these companies.
And why is that? What's driving this transformation?
There are many factors at play here. Firstly, yeah, a lot of these companies have invested heavily on innovation, design, and quality, which has really improved the product itself. But also from a connection standpoint, they've become more sophisticated at understanding and connecting with consumers emotionally rather than just competing on price and affordability. The third is about how they're really effective at using digital channels and direct to consumer models. If you think about social commerce, there's many positive examples there in ways that traditional brands have been slower to adopt.
Jason, are you seeing any particular categories or markets in your data where this shift is most pronounced?
Definitely. I mean, possibly the most well known is in consumer electronics, where brands like Xiaomi and OnePlus have for a long time been building up strong followings. But we're seeing this trend elsewhere too. So in fashion and beauty, you could think of names like Perfect Diary, where they've been disrupting some of the traditional players. And increasingly in automotive, we've got Chinese EV manufacturers who are seen very much as serious competitors to the other global names. And really, the common thread going across all of these categories is we have brands who really understand digital native consumers and are moving quickly.
So what does this mean for, the sort of established global kind of legacy Western brands? Should they be worried?
Maybe worried is the wrong word, but they should certainly be paying attention. Our data makes it clear that, especially among some of the younger segments, consumers are increasingly open to Chinese brands and don't automatically associate made in China with lower quality anymore. So, across those areas we talked about, electronics, fashion, beauty, we have Chinese brands who are now competing effectively on quality, innovation, and brand appeal.
Right. And Stephanie, in this report, you talk about how this trend extends beyond China. It's not just China, it's part of a broader Eastfluence shift, as you call it. Can you explain what that means?
Right. So, yeah, as you mentioned, Eastfluence brings this trend out of China, and it really refers to this broader phenomenon of Asian cultural values and the influence that it has on global consumer mindsets. So, if you think of K beauty or K pop coming out of Korea, or in Japan, you have concepts like Ikigai or Wabi Sabi that it's really taken off with Western wellness and lifestyle brands. Those are some examples of products and cultural values coming out of Asia and the Asian region, influencing how people from other parts of the world shop and also what they value.
That's really interesting. But I think the big takeaway for me here is that made in China or various other Asian countries is no longer sort of automatically associated with low quality and budget products. So I guess that means emerging Asian brands need to really start investing in brand building to build those emotional brand connections with consumers. And I guess, you know, legacy Western brands then have to double down on innovation in products and distinctive branding. Right, let's move on to our final trend, the promise and threat of AI in content. Stephanie, you talk about advances in Gen AI that are unlocking new creative capabilities, but they're also prompting serious concerns. What's the tension here?
Right. So that tension is really between efficiency and authenticity. When we talk about generative AI and content, it has made it a lot easier now to make and create content. So it's much faster, it's cheaper, and it's a lot more accessible than it used to be. But for consumers, on the other side, they're really concerned about quality and ethics. So thinking about things like how does it impact human creativity? And right now we're seeing huge backlash against what's being called AI slop, which I'm sure all of us would have encountered many times by now, which is actually low quality AI content.
And Jason, what are you seeing in GWI data regarding the consumer perspective? What are their attitudes towards AI generated content?
Yeah, it's a little bit mixed and at times contradictory, as you might expect for a newly emerging space. So, on the one hand, around about a third of consumers do believe that AI ads are more effective than human made ones. A similar proportion say they could actually make the recipients more likely to engage with the brands. So, there's openness to AI content when it's done well. But the really crucial thing is that there's universal support for the importance of the human involvement. And the overwhelming majority of consumers think it's very or extremely important that AI generated content is clearly labeled. That's perhaps the big message here. Consumers want transparency. They want to know when they're interacting with AI, especially in the most high stakes contexts like healthcare information, political content, or legal documents.
So, what does that mean for brands that are trying to use AI in their marketing?
I would say there are two things to consider. So, firstly, you really need to be strategic about where you deploy AI in content and also where do you bring in human creativity and connection, because those are still things that consumers really value at this time. The second consideration, as Jason touched on earlier, is the importance of transparent labeling and deciding what practices you want to implement to meet consumers' expectations for transparency and trust. And you're using AI in marketing, especially if you think about regulations as well going forward. There's going to be a lot more limitations and requirements from the regulatory perspective.
And Jason, final thoughts. Where do you see this going in 2026 and beyond?
Well, look, there's little doubt that AI and content is here to stay. Adoption will only go upwards. And actually, the quality, the fidelity of what can be produced will only increase as well. And in future, it will become increasingly hard to distinguish what was human generated content from AI generated. And I think that's why establishing that transparency over labeling standards is really important. I think the brands that succeed will be those that balance efficiency with authenticity, the ones who are transparent about how they're using AI, but maintain the human elements that consumers think drives the emotional connection that they're craving. So really it's about finding the right balance.
Great. Okay, so we've now covered all five of the major trends that we track in the report: comfort consumption, AI companions, youth social media restrictions, the reassessment of made in China, and AI in content creation. Stephanie, would you say there's a clear common thought, a common thread that runs through all of this?
Yeah, I would say the common thread between the trends is that tension that we're seeing between innovation and trust. So we touched on this a little bit in the last trend on AI and content. Consumers are overall really open to new technologies and new ways of connecting, but they're also demanding transparency and authenticity. And they want to see responsibility from the providers and brands that are using these kinds of technologies. So for 2026, I would say success means finding a balance between the two.
And for a CMO who's listening to this podcast and thinking, where do I start? Where would you guide them?
I think a good place to start is just familiarizing yourself with these trends and thinking about which ones are the most relevant to your brand and also your category. You don't really need to address all five of them immediately, and they're not going to have the same level of impact, but you should understand how each one could affect your business. And from there, you can start to think about the decision questions. And I've already mentioned a few today. In the report, we have a full list of questions that can help to guide your strategic planning.
Jason, any final advice from you for marketers navigating 2026?
Yeah, I mean, as always, stay close to your data. Consumer attitudes and behaviors, they shift quickly, and what worked last year may well not be relevant this year. So just keep investing in understanding your specific audience segments. Be willing to test new approaches, be willing to adapt, and just as a brand, stay agile and stay consumer centric.
Thanks, and excellent advice from both of you. Thank you, Stephanie and Jason, for sharing these insights. That pretty much wraps up today's session. For our listeners, the full 2026 Consumer Trends Report is available on WARC.com, complete with detailed data, case studies, and strategic recommendations for each trend. There are also a set of critical decision questions that will help you, as Stephanie talked about, help you take the first steps towards building a strategy for 2026. Thank you for joining us here today. If you like what you've heard, please join us again to get more evidence-based insights into marketing effectiveness. The WARC Podcast is available on YouTube and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Adi Kishore and look forward to seeing you next time.